Welcome to Jerusalem Unplugged, the only podcast dedicated to Jerusalem, its history, and its people. Your host, Roberto Mazza, will bring you guests discussing their relationship with the Holy City. A journey through history, society, feelings, and hopes for the future. Follow the podcast on all social media platforms at Jerusalem Unplugged.
Welcome to Jerusalem Unplugged, the podcast dedicated to Jerusalem, its history, and its people. I'm your host, Roberto Mazza, and today it's with great pleasure that my host is a good old friend from a long time ago. We met many times in various places, and we shared stories about Jerusalem. Professor Kostantinos Papasthatis. Kostas, if I may, is currently an assistant professor at the University of Thessaloniki in Greece, in the Department of Political Science. He has a record of, I can't even count, so I would just say countless articles related to Jerusalem, the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate and their relationship, particularly in the late Ottoman, but more importantly, around the period of the British Mandate. So if you just do Google Scholar, you find tons of articles and all of them very interesting and fascinating. But first of all, Kostas, welcome.
Robbie, thank you so much for the invitation. It's a real pleasure to contribute to the podcast on Jerusalem. And thank you very much for your kind words and the introduction.
The first question I want to ask you is that, do you have any personal connection with Jerusalem? And if not, how did you get to work on the relationship between Jerusalem and the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate, which is such a fascinating topic? And a complex one.
Well, thank you for the question, Roberto. It's, I was interested in Jerusalem and the Orthodox Church of Jerusalem from when I was still at the high school, to be honest, when I read a book of Stratis Tsirkas, a Greek novelist, very famous, about Jerusalem and the Greek club of Jerusalem. And then I started reading about Jerusalem. And after my master, I chose to work on the church because I studied church history and theology. I chose to work on the Church of Jerusalem and on the mandate period, and particularly on the status quo question and the holy places question during the British Mandate. I worked on the archives. I had the opportunity to visit Jerusalem, of course, and to work on the Israel State Archives, and where there is a lot of material about the mandate period, and I was very lucky to have access to the archives of the Patriarchy of Jerusalem, at least to some part of the archives. So after my PhD, I had a lot of material, and I continued my work, my research on the Church of Jerusalem, and particularly on the relations between the religious bureaucracy and the congregation, which had, of course, a national and the political aspect, namely the nationalization process. And then I visited and I worked at the Hebrew University for 2 years as a postdoc researcher. I wrote some papers, and currently, since 2017, I am working at the project European Cultural Diplomacy and Arab Christians in Palestine, with a connected history during the formative years of the Middle East, of the Mandate, with Associate Professor Karen Sanchez. This project is funded by the Netherlands Organization for Scientific Research, And we have published some work on the Jerusalem affairs as well. Currently, I'm working on the work on the question of autokephaly of the Church of Jerusalem during the Ottoman times. And I hope that there will be a very interesting publication.
I just want to say something about the archives before we move on, because obviously you had access to one of the most secret archives probably in the world, even more than the Vatican ones. When people think about Vatican archives, think about the secrecy, but actually getting access to some archives in Jerusalem, it's even more complicated, and sometimes is only based on nationalities and languages. So kudos to you that you had the possibility to access that treasure.
Yeah, I was very lucky, indeed.
The first thing I want to ask you is very much about the Greek Orthodox Church in Jerusalem in particular. This is a feature that marked the history of Jerusalem for millennia, but sometimes it gets lost in the history of all of the other communities, and certainly the multi-layered history of Jerusalem. So I was wondering if you can just give us a sense of what is the Greek Orthodox Church in Jerusalem? How does it work? And if you can also start introducing the question of the divisions between the Greek clergy and obviously the Arab laity.
From the incorporation of Palestine to the Ottoman Empire in 1516, the Patriarchate of Jerusalem was transformed from the structure of its operation was transformed from a church-centered organization to a monastery-centered organization. So it took the monastic form of bureaucratic function, if I may say that. And because of the centralized function, the centralized structure of the Ottoman Empire, the Church of Jerusalem, which had become a monastery, a brotherhood, and its head was the Patriarch of Jerusalem, became gradually subject to the control of the Ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople, the synod of which, in some instances, even appointed the Jerusalem Patriarch, especially after the 17th century. This, of course, led to the existence of two centers of power within the Jerusalem Church. The first one was at the pan-Ottoman level, working in Istanbul for the high political affairs of the institution. And the other power center of the church was in Jerusalem, which was operating at a local level. And the fact that the Jerusalem church was controlled by the Church of Constantinople was the effect of this state of affairs was to become gradually Hellenized, especially after the 18th century and the gradual construction and development of the Greek national identity. And this is how to put it very simply, or an oversimplification, actually, how the Church of Jerusalem, in terms of bureaucracy, in terms of hierarchy, was, in their great majority, was of Greek national identity, while the congregation was the indigenous Arab Palestinians. Of course, this dispute, which had various moments, political moments, especially after the late Ottoman period, and particularly after 1872, was not only related to the national feeling, or the national identity. It was also related to the secularization process, the idea that the congregation, the religious body should have a say, should participate in the administration of church affairs, and not only the church establishment, as well as there was an economic aspect, a financial aspect, namely the administration of the vast real estate property of the Church of Jerusalem, which was also related to, after especially 1917 and the Balfour Declaration, it was also related to the future of Palestine, to the political question.
I want to ask you something about properties, because obviously you already mentioned also holy places. And I was wondering if you can give us a sense of what exactly the Greek Orthodox Church owns, both in terms of holy places, so the control of these sacred areas, but also in terms of lands or buildings. Often we hear in the news that the Greek Orthodox Church is somehow involved in the sales of land, of other properties. So, and it's confusing for many, because obviously we think about, particularly in the current times, the state of Israel, and it sounds rather bizarre that actually there's an entity like the Greek Orthodox Church that is involved in the sale of, as I said earlier, properties of buildings.
Okay, well, this is the million-dollar question, probably. Roberto, these are two separate questions. As far as the holy places is concerned, the question on the holy places. The holy places, the ownership or the custodianship of the holy places is regulated by the so-called status quo agreement or status quo doctrine. According to the status quo is regulated by the arrangement of Firman, of the Ottoman Firman of 1757. Actually, there was a dispute after the incorporation of Palestine, and especially after the 17th century, between the Greek Patriarchy, the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate, or the Orthodox Patriarchate, to be more clear, and the Custodia di Terra Santa, the Franciscans, and as well as the Armenian Patriarchate, about the custodianship or the ownership of the holy places. This dispute, which had many episodes, was finalized by the Sublime Porte in 1757, and because for a number of reasons, the major of which was the external, namely the interventions of the other great powers of the time, especially France and Russia. France, under the capitulations regime, because of the capitulations regime, was after protecting the Franciscans and pressed for more privileges over the holy places. And on the other hand, Russia was doing the same for the Orthodox Church. So the Sublime Porte issued this firman of 1757, giving the primary place in the holy places to the Orthodox Church. This frame, this normative frame, was further acknowledged by the Porte in 1852, just before the Crimean War, and it was this state of affairs was further acknowledged by the international community in the Treaty of Paris in 1856 and the Congress of Berlin in 1878. So the Orthodox Church acquired a predominant position in comparison to the other denominations, which was, of course, a cause of constant antagonism between these denominations. There were some minor changes which had the consent of all the parties involved after 1757. Nowadays, there are no any serious, at least, disputes between the churches as far as the status quo is concerned. There are some between the Ethiopians and the Copts, or the Orthodox and the Armenians, but in general lines, there is cooperation between the various denominations. Now, as far as the question about the real estate property of the Church of Jerusalem is concerned, this is related to the legal framework that was in effect during the Ottoman times. This land was acquired by the Patriarchy in the Ottoman times, not afterwards. And it was acquired as Vakf properties, as endowments, because during the Ottoman times, the church had not the right, it could not acquire land as a legal person, as a legal personality, okay? Only as an endowment, only as a Vakf. Together, the Patriarchate has, to give some numbers, if I may, is the owner or the trustee of properties estimated to be 631 properties all over Palestine and Israel. According to Tamari, the Patriarchate, together with the Russian mission, had more Vakf properties than the Muslims and the Jews and the Catholic endowments together. Katz and Kark, in their two works published in British Journal of Middle Eastern Studies and Middle Eastern Studies, identified half of the properties, and they were more that they were, I don't remember the exact number, but it was, they argued that the Patriarchate of Jerusalem is has the more real estate properties in Israel Palestine after the state of Israel, and so it's a lot. As far as the old city is concerned, which is extremely important for the region, It is 1/3 of the total area of 900 dunams. It's the old city, and 300, approximately 300 dunams belong to the Patriarchy. So we are speaking about 1/3 of the old city. And this land was acquired by monks in the 19th century, such as Nikiforos Petatzis or Sarkistan Epthimios in late 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. We're speaking about the current neighborhood, the current neighborhoods of Rehavia, Talpiot. It's very close to the old train station and the German colony, and not only there. It's these lands, of course, are leased to after the British Mandate, and especially after 1948. These estates were leased to the State of Israel, to the Yishuv.
So we can safely say that between holy sites, land, and buildings, the Greek Orthodox Church essentially is the biggest landowner or landlord in Palestine, Israel. But
one of the biggest, at least, yes.
Yeah, one of the biggest indeed. But the point is that despite the ownership and the control, that doesn't necessarily translate into a Palestinian ownership. And I think this is one of the most heated debates amongst the Greek Orthodox Church and obviously its followers. You already mentioned that obviously the hierarchical structure is for the most part Greek, but obviously the followers, particularly living in the area, are obviously Christian Palestinians. And I guess it's no secret that the relationship between the two has been marked by ups and downs. I would say mostly downs. And I was wondering if you can give us a sense of the history of this relationship between the hierarchical structure, so before the clergy, the patriarch himself, and obviously the Arab laity.
This dispute, the starting point of this dispute is 1872. The Palestinians, the Palestinian congregation, the Arab congregation at that time, was revolted actually against the decision of the Patriarchate of Constantinople to withdraw its, and the decision of the Synod of the Brotherhood to withdraw the recognition of Patriarch Cyril because of his support to the Russian, as they call it, at least, to the Russian endeavor to control the Jerusalem Church. The Russian mission and the various Russian institutions operating in the Ottoman Empire were considered by the dominant Greek church officials, hierarchies, as an alien, as the hostile other, if I may, which is after getting the dominance, stealing the dominance of the Greeks and putting Russian hierarchies or local Arab hierarchies in their place. And at the same time, in all church institutions in the other patriarchates within the Ottoman Empire, there was an ongoing secularization process, secularization of the church administration structures. So in the Church of in Istanbul and in Antioch as well, the laity, the congregation, started to have a say in the administration. the Arab Orthodox, the Arab Palestinian Orthodox was asking, they had actually the same demands. However, the Greek Brotherhood, the Greek religious hierarchy, refused to apply this set of regulations, which were applied in the other jurisdictions, church jurisdictions. So in 1875, there was the fundamental law of the Patriarchy, which had no any article which would give the congregation any right to have a say in the administration. And the same applies to the internal regulations of 1902, which did not satisfy any of the Arab Orthodox demands. So after 1908 and the Young Turks Revolution, there was a clause in the constitution of the Young Turks, which gave which the Arab Orthodox interpreted it as giving them the opportunity to organize, to establish a mixed council, which would have, which would give them a co-administration of the church, especially as far as the finances were concerned. However, this was not accepted, these demands were not accepted by the Greek hierarchy. There was a new Turkish order in 1910, which allowed the establishment, the creation of this mixed council, but this mixed council, because of the war, could not operate effectively. There were some meetings, not some meetings. The mixed council met regularly according to new research. However, there was not any change, any reform of the way that the finances and the overall administration of the Jerusalem Patriarchate had at that time. This was further, the Arab Orthodox demands were further promoted in a way in the first years of the British Mandate. There was a commission created, the well-known Bertram Young Commission, but which this commission supported or proposed a new framework of governance, of church governance. There were some regulations, some draft regulations for new draft regulations for the Patriarchate. However, these were never enacted. And the reason behind this, behind the British decision not to change the state of affairs was that the Patriarchate was viewed as a Greek institution, and Athens, in 1939 at least, was an important ally for the British just 2 years before the Second World War. We know we have the archives, which plainly give us this view. And moreover, there was the opinion prevailed that any change of the constitution of the Church of Jerusalem would be a violation of the status quo. So if there was a violation of the status quo, it would be a blow, probably, not a blow, but it will be a difficult situation for the British, taking into account that this might have triggered the intervention of other powers such as France or Greece. Or the status quo was of the holy places was and the maintenance of the status quo was a condition sine qua non for the British, and in order to avoid any intervention in their colony. And this is why there was no any change actually after 40 years, and despite the fact that there were the Arab demands were met with the British acknowledged the right that the Palestine Orthodox were right, at least to some degree. They did nothing to change this state of affairs.
Before talking about the Mandate period, particularly in relation to the Greek colony, and also discussing later on the famous ceremony of the Holy Fires that takes place at Easter time in Jerusalem, I want to jump forward and actually ask about the contemporary status quo. Sometimes people don't really realize that this status quo is still valid. And I was wondering if there's been any change in the past few decades, and certainly how the status quo navigated, changes in the administration of Jerusalem, obviously with first the division between Israel and Jordan, and after 67, obviously Jerusalem now once again ruled by the Israelis. So I was wondering to what extent, or if any change occurred in the status quo, and what's the position of the Greek Church in the status quo, and also if relations between the Arab laity and the Greek Orthodox hierarchy have changed up to 2022.
Okay, a lot of questions. So after 1948, both the Church of Jerusalem, the Patriarchy, was under the Jordanian rule, of course, in the old city. The Jordanians, though they were very close, they understood, of course, the demands of the Arab Orthodox, of the Palestinian Orthodox. They did not proceed to any reform because they thought that maintaining the status quo of the holy places would be would have a positive effect in their relations to the other European powers. That is, moreover, Greece had a very good relation with the Arab states and Jordan. Greece, let me remind you that it did not recognize Israel, the state of Israel, in 1948. This recognition was actually taken place in 1993, so almost 40 years after the establishment, the creation of the state of Israel. So Jordan had very good relations with Greece. Greece was anti-Israeli, if I may, and so there was no reason from a diplomatic point of view for Jordan to change the status quo or to make any move against the protege of Athens, of the Greek state. And this is why the regulation, the new fundamental law of the Patriarchate, enacted in 1958, so under the Jordanian, when the Patriarchate was under the in Jordan, let's say Jerusalem was under Jordanian rule, did not stipulate, did not have any clause which might be viewed as disputing the Greek character, the supposed, from a historical perspective, Greek character of the institution.
Just wondering again about the contemporary situation. I mean, what is the relationship between the Greek Orthodox Church, the State of Israel, and also with the Palestinian Authority, given, while Oslo may have failed in terms of achieving a permanent peace, but certainly created another institution. And I was wondering, how does the church navigate through, different institutions and different group of people?
We know that there is a very good working relationship with both institutions, both with Israel and the Palestine Authority. I don't know, or maybe we know at least that the relations between the Greek hierarchy and the Arab congregation are problematic. However, this problematic relation is not reflected, at least in terms of legislation and diplomacy, in the relations between the Patriarchate and the Jordanian Kingdom, or the Kingdom of Jordan, or the Palestine Authority.
When I interviewed Maria Chiara Rioli and asked about the question of Catholics in Palestine and in Jerusalem, obviously many had the impression there was a very complex relationship. But after hearing more about the Greek Orthodox Church, I must say that this is even, is taken to another level. So let me go back to history and ask about the famous Greek colony of Jerusalem. It kind of disappeared after 1948, and it's only because of the work of some Greeks of Jerusalem, mostly in the diaspora, that actually the very idea to talk about the Greek colony of Jerusalem came back, showing that actually, again, Jerusalem was multi-layered and had the presence of a variety of communities, some that survived and some that disappeared. And so I was wondering if you can give us a sense of what was this Greek colony, who were the people, and what happened to the Greeks of Jerusalem.
This is I can talk for a day, for days about these questions. I talk a lot. I'm sorry. Apologies for that. So let me give you some information about the Greek community in general. Okay, if I may. So the first immigrants, the Greek immigrants in Palestine, came in mid-19th century from other places of the Ottoman Empire. At that time, we cannot speak about Greeks in the strict sense. We can speak about Orthodox, Rum, as they call it in the Ottoman Empire, about Orthodox who speak Greek, and they are affiliated to, or they are close to, the Greek national idea. However, these Greek people, if we can call them this way, were actually integrated into the Arab Orthodox national body. However, when we speak about the second wave of the Greek immigrants, and this takes place in late 19th century, we see that these people have strong bonds and loyalties to the Greek national center. They speak Greek and they don't speak Arab, and they define themselves in terms of culture as Greeks. And in this way, there is the distinction between the in-group, out-group. The in-group, out-group, this out-group distinction is made along not religious lines, but cultural lines, linguistic lines. So in the end of 19th century, beginning of 20th century, we have in 1902, actually, we have the first organizational structure of the Greek community in Jerusalem. And this was made after the initiative of the Greek consul, and it was called an association, FPIA, the Greek Association FPIA. So the Patriarchate supported this initiative, supported it financially. In particularly the sacristan Ευθύμιος, the well-known Ευθύμιος, who built who constructed many buildings and funded the construction of many buildings in Haifa, Jaffa, and Jerusalem, gave to this association a plot of land close to the monastery of Katamon, more than 100,000 square peaks, for the construction of the Greek colony. It is between the German colony and the monastery of Katamon. So this land was divided in 80 parcels and distributed. And after some years, the same Ευθύμιος gave another plot of land, which was divided again in many parcels and given to the members of the association. So there were two colonies, actually, the old Lower Greek district and the new Upper district, which was in Baka, close to Baka Valley. And moreover, Ευθύμιος funded the construction of the buildings. He also funded the construction of the famous Greek club in Jerusalem. However, the World War I made the local Ottoman authorities to view the Greek subjects, or the Orthodox Ottoman subjects, as an enemy, as a fifth column, if I may. So they were sent to exile in Syria and in Cilicia. They returned to Jerusalem, found them in a very bad state, and they were forced to sell their properties. Almost or more than a half of the Greek properties within the Greek colony were sold at that time to Arab Palestinians, to Orthodox Palestinians. And this created a problem in the sense that it was a Greek colony, but the Greeks, or many Greeks, were out of this colony in their view, at least. And there was an activity in the part of the Patriarchate and the consulate, and the Greek consulate. The Greek club and the Greek community was reorganized. There was established a music association, a Greek charity association, a Greek sport club, a Greek football club, a ladies club, and there were also 3 newspapers published by 3 Greek newspapers. So in the beginning, after the Young Turks Revolution, we have the newspaper Palestine in Greek. However, after the uprising of the Palestinian Orthodox against the Patriarchy, the editor left for Alexandria, for Cairo, excuse me. And then we have the Gazette of the Patriarchate Nea Sion in 1904. And then after, in 1940, we have the weekly newspaper Kyrix and the newspaper Ελληνική Ζωή. This newspaper, Ελληνική Ζωή, has very important material, valuable material about what happened after 1948 in Jerusalem and the Greek properties in Western Jerusalem. So if someone is interested in this topic, he will find very good material, very interesting material.
It's a fascinating story that certainly requires, at some point, I guess, a good book about the Greek colony of Jerusalem, in a sense, Greek Jerusalem. There's been a number of works published on the various communities populating Jerusalem, particularly during the British Mandate, and certainly the Greek one is missing. I have one last question, which goes back to the church and also a sort of competition with a fellow podcast, Stories from Palestine, that hosted a brilliant episode about the famous Holy Fire ceremony hosted by the Greek Orthodox at Easter. And so I was wondering, given your expertise, if you can give us a sense of what is this ceremony, but also how it played, more importantly, in political terms, given that you're a political scientist and historian, particularly in the 20th century, still as any political role, in the 21st century?
Well, this is a very interesting question and a dangerous question, if I may. Well, first of all, the ceremony of the Holy Fire reflects the preeminence of the Orthodox Patriarch and the Orthodox Patriarchy. The Orthodox Patriarch is the church official who gets the Holy Fire and gives it to the other religious officials. That's the first point. The second point is that there is no change in the ceremony from the 17th or 18th century, as far as I know, at least. We have many narrations. We have an official narrative about the ceremony from Kast in his famous book on the status quo question. And we have reports in the British archives about the ceremony. And we have some church descriptions coming from church officials. The question that was open is, what is the miracle or the ceremony of the Holy Fire or the tradition of the Holy Fire? There was a book published 3 years ago, by Dimitris Alikakos in Greek. He's a journalist who made some research on this question, as a journalist, and who got an interview from some important church officials of the Jerusalem Patriarchate, who said on camera that this is not a miracle, it is a tradition. And they actually, one of them described how it is done. And one of, according to the author, according to Alikakos, the sacristan enters 3 hours before the ceremony starts, enters the church, and places the fire, the candle, on the grave of Jesus. Then the patriarch enters, he gets the fire and he gets out of and gives it to the congregation, to the flock. That is according to journalist Dimitris Alikakos, how this tradition, miracle, ceremony, whatever, is done. And this is stated on camera by the church official who actually do this. I think that this book will be translated, I don't know, but in any case, the thing is that we are speaking about a tradition. We should not consider this tradition to be something against the religious sentiment. I don't know. It's some people believe in this tradition as a miracle. This is a personal, actually, this is an existential question for some people. However, and another point, last point, I know I speak a lot and it's, and I speak slowly, a bit slowly. The thing is that the Patriarch of Jerusalem, the Orthodox Patriarch of Jerusalem, has, when he enters, he has he's accompanied by the head of the Israeli police in the old city. That has a special symbolic meaning. It might mean nothing. It is an Israeli official who is taking care of security or protecting the patriarch. Okay, that's one interpretation. The other interpretation is that, which has a historic significance and a political significance, is that the Israeli official is considered to be part of the ceremony. So in that case, if we accept this interpretation, all the churches which are involved in the ceremony of the Holy Fire acknowledge the right of an Israeli official to be part of the ceremony. So they accept, in a way, they acknowledge a political competency of Israel in the old city. But this is an interpretation. This might be an interpretation.
The fact that the Israeli police is invited sounds like a way to legitimize Israeli rule over the old city. But as you said,
it might be an interpretation.
So it's an unclear
one. I'm
one.
not saying that this is the case. I disagree. As far as I'm concerned, I disagree with that interpretation.
But still, it's happening. So I guess this is really open. Yeah. This is fascinating.
It might be an open question.
This was Kostantinos Papasthatis, currently assistant professor at University of Thessaloniki, with a long list of great articles published in a number of journals. And I just want to mention a few, particularly in Bijmes and the Jerusalem Quarterly. Kostas, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the invitation, Roberto. It was a real pleasure.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support the podcast, please share it with others on social media or leave a rating and review. To catch all the latest, follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook @Jerusalem Unplugged. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.